Imagine a palace so expensive people call it the most expensive mansion in America. The dark story of America's most expensive mansion, The Breakers, is not just about a beautiful house by the ocean. It is a story about a family that tried to buy eternity for themselves and paid for it with nerves, tragedies, and a slow collapse. Late 19th century. The Vanderbilt family looks down at the world from above. They build the Breakers as a stone crown on the edge of the sea, halls covered in gold, marble from Europe, balls where champagne flows like a river. On the outside, a fairy tale. On the inside, fear of losing everything. Scandals in the press, workers who hate the railroad kings, children who grow up in luxury, but without a normal life. Every room in this house is not only wealth, but pressure, loneliness, and constant anxiety about the future. Decades will pass, and the world will change, and with it, the fate of the Breakers will change too. What was built as a private fortress of power will suddenly turn into a stage set for tourists, a souvenir in the background of someone else's selfie. How did it happen that this palace, created to glorify the Vanderbilt name forever, became a quiet monument to their fall? And what dark price is really hidden behind the walls of the most expensive mansion in America? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Chapter 1. The Night at the Breakers. The transition from invitation to reality happens fast. You walk through the iron gates as daylight softens. The tour group is small, 15 people, maybe 20. Phones are already in hands, cameras lifted. The guide leads you toward the entrance, and then you see it. The facade rising above the lawn, stone and columns and rows of windows catching the last light of the sun. The Breakers, not a house, a statement, 70 rooms, built in the late 1890s by Cornelius Vanderbilt II, grandson of the Commodore, inheritor of what was then the largest railroad fortune in America. The guide's voice is steady, almost musical from repetition. She explains that this was a summer cottage. The word lands strangely. Cottages are small. This is the opposite of small. You step inside. The great hall swallows you, ceilings high enough to make you tilt your head back until your neck protests. Marble floors polished glass smooth, columns carved from stone shipped across the Atlantic. Light filters through tall windows, and beyond them the ocean stretches flat and endless, a band of gray-blue at the edge of everything. The guide keeps moving through details. Italian craftsmen, French designers, materials from a dozen countries. Construction took 2 years. The house opened in 1895. Then she adds something quietly, almost as an aside. This is the second Breakers. The first one burned. The words hang there. You look around at the stone, at the steel beams hidden behind plaster, at fireplaces built with new codes in mind. Everything here feels like it was designed to resist disaster, fire, storms, time itself. The Vanderbilts were not building a simple summer getaway. They were building a fortress against fate. The tour continues. You move through rooms filled with furniture roped off, paintings lined in heavy frames, chandeliers frozen mid-glitter overhead. Other visitors murmur, lift their phones, follow the guide from doorway to doorway. But something shifts as the evening deepens. The house slowly empties. Staff close doors behind you with soft clicks. The sound of the ocean through open windows grows louder, less like background noise, and more like a steady voice. Maya stops walking. She is 32, lives in a small rental in Brooklyn, makes videos about history for YouTube. Her parents worked 2 jobs each. She was the first in her family to finish college. For years, she has filmed places like this, grand houses, old money, beautiful ruins. Her videos do well. People like watching her walk through rooms they will never own, explaining why marble costs more than brick, why a family once thought it needed 40 bedrooms, but tonight feels different. She stands in the Great Hall after the last tour group leaves. The guide has moved on. A security guard watches from the doorway but does not hurry her. She looks up at the ceiling, painted with clouds and sky, to make you forget you are indoors. She thinks about the word cottage, about calling this a cottage, about the first breakers burning and the family deciding to rebuild in stone. She thinks about the people who cleaned these floors. Her older videos never mentioned them. She talked about architects, about Vanderbilts, about wealth and design. She showed viewers the gold leaf, the imported tile, the ocean view. She made it beautiful. That was the job. But standing here now in the quiet, she feels the missing pieces. She wonders what and who she has been editing out. The house was built to last forever. It did not. The Vanderbilts do not live here anymore. The fortune scattered. The name remains, but the power behind it faded decades ago. What stands now is a museum, a lesson, a place where strangers pay $20 to walk through someone else's dream and someone else's downfall. Maya raises her camera. She films the empty hall, the light thinning through the windows, the sound of the ocean outside pressing in. She does not narrate yet. She does not know what this video will say, but she knows it will not be about beauty alone. She knows the story of the breakers is darker than the postcards suggest, darker than the guided tours admit, and she knows that to understand this house, she will have to go back to the beginning, to the fire, to the men who laid the stone, to the family that built a palace and lost it anyway. The security guard clears his throat. Time to leave. Maya nods, pockets her phone, and walks toward the door. Tomorrow she will start digging. Chapter 2. Building a Stone Dream. The digging starts with blueprints. The next morning, Maya sits in her apartment, laptop open, coffee cooling beside her. She scrolls through archives, old scans of newspapers, digital copies of letters, historical society databases that load slowly. The Breakers has been photographed thousands of times. Everyone knows what it looks like now. What she needs is what it looked like before the marble, before the gold, before it became what guides now call the most expensive summer cottage in America. She finds construction photos from 1893, black and white images, corners worn, dust specks frozen in the emulsion. The first one shows an empty lot on Ochre Point Avenue, grass and rocks sloping down to the cliff edge, the ocean beyond, flat and pale. Nothing else. The second photo, dated roughly 6 months later, shows the skeleton. Steel beams rise from stone foundations. Scaffolding wraps around the frame like a cage. Workers, tiny against the scale, stand on platforms 3 stories up. No safety harnesses, no helmets, just men, planks, and open air. The work moves fast. Cornelius Vanderbilt II does not want to wait. He hires Richard Morris Hunt, the most sought-after architect in America, the man who designed the base of the Statue of Liberty. Hunt sketches an Italian Renaissance palace, but larger, grander. Not for a Medici prince, but for a railroad king who wants the world to remember his name long after he is gone. The plans call for limestone from Indiana, marble from Italy and Algeria, granite for the foundation, carved and fitted so precisely that mortar barely shows. This is not a house assembled by local carpenters with lumber from a nearby yard. This is a project that demands coordination across oceans and borders. Ships unload stone at Newport's docks. Trains haul it to the site. Teams of masons, many of them Italian immigrants recruited specifically for their skill with ornamental carving, work through New England winters with numb fingers and stone dust in their lungs. The timeline is aggressive, 2 years from groundbreaking to completion. Most houses of this size take closer to 5. Here, delay is not an option. Maya clicks through the images. She sees the great hall taking shape, walls rising, windows fitted into place like pieces of a puzzle. She sees workers in caps and suspenders leaning against wheelbarrows. Faces blurred by long exposure times so they look like ghosts caught between movements. She sees Alice Vanderbilt, Cornelius's wife, standing in an unfinished doorway, long dress brushing over sawdust, inspecting progress with a calm, practiced gaze. One photo stops her. It shows the rear loggia under construction. The view opens straight to the ocean, columns not yet in place, only wooden supports holding up the roof structure. In the foreground, a man in a suit, likely Hunt, gestures toward the sea. Beside him stands Cornelius Vanderbilt, shorter than Maya expected, hands clasped behind his back, looking not at the horizon but at the raw shell of the house. The caption, handwritten in faded ink along the margin, reads, "Discussing fire safety measures." Fire safety. Maya leans closer to the screen. She opens a new tab and starts another search. The first breakers, the one that burned. Details are sparse. It was a wooden mansion, large, but not extraordinary by Newport standards, built in the 1870s. On November 25, 1892, in the middle of the night, it caught fire. The blaze spread fast. The family escaped. The staff escaped. By morning, the house was gone. Newspaper accounts from the time describe the scene in hard, clipped sentences. Flames visible from miles away along the coast, the roof collapsing inward with a roar, heat so intense that nearby trees caught fire and windows in neighboring houses cracked. Cornelius reportedly stood on the lawn and watched it burn. He did not speak. He did not weep. He simply watched until there was nothing left to see. 3 months later, he bought the land outright and started again. This time, he told Hunt, nothing flammable. No wooden frame, no shingle roof, no decorative timber that might turn into kindling. Stone, steel, tile, and plaster. If it could burn, it would not be used. The second breakers would be a fortress, not against invading armies, against fire itself. Maya scrolls back to the construction photo. She studies Cornelius's face, blurred but intent, eyes fixed on the unfinished structure. She wonders what he was thinking in that moment, whether he truly believed stone could protect him from the next disaster, whether he thought money and planning could outvote fate, could erase the memory of watching his first house fall in on itself. She saves the image. Then she starts writing the next part of her script. The part about fear, disguised as ambition. About a man building a palace on the ashes of the last one, trying to turn anxiety into architecture. Chapter 3: Fire, Panic, and a Second Chance. The fear was not irrational. Fire in the Gilded Age was not rare. It was expected. Wooden houses, gas lighting, coal furnaces, kitchens with open flames running 12 hours a day. The wealthiest families in America lived inside structures that could turn into ovens in minutes. Maya finds a servant's account in a Newport historical collection, written decades after the fire by someone who was there. The author's name is recorded as Brigid Callahan, Irish-born, employed as a housemaid at the first breakers in 1892. The account is brief, 3 pages, handwritten, donated to the Historical Society in 1954. She reads it twice. Brigid describes waking to the smell of smoke, not the clean, controlled scent of a fireplace, but something sharp and wrong. She opens her door on the 3rd floor and sees haze in the hallway. Other maids are already moving, skirts rustling, voices low but urgent. No screaming yet, just quick, deliberate motion. She runs to the children's rooms. The Vanderbilt children, Gertrude, Cornelius III, Gladys, and the others, are being carried downstairs by nurses and other staff. Brigid grabs blankets from a linen closet and follows. By the time she reaches the first floor, smoke is already pouring through cracks and along the ceiling. The fire has started somewhere in the basement or kitchen. No one knows exactly where. It does not matter. The house is going. Outside, on the frozen lawn, the family and staff gather. Cornelius stands near the front, fully dressed despite the hour, coat buttoned tight. Alice holds the youngest children. The older ones stand silent, watching the glow. Staff cluster in small groups, some barefoot, some in nightclothes, shivering in the November cold and trying not to look directly at the flames. Brigid writes, "We stood there and watched it fall. The roof went first, collapsing inward with a sound like thunder. Then the walls. The heat was so strong we had to step back." Mr. Vanderbilt did not move. He watched the whole thing. The fire brigade arrives too late. They save nothing. By dawn, the house is rubble and ash. The stone chimneys stand alone, blackened, surrounded by smoking debris and twisted metal. Cornelius does not wait. Maya finds records of his next steps. Within a week, he hires engineers to assess the foundation. Within a month, he sits down with Richard Morris Hunt to discuss a replacement, not a renovation. A complete rebuild. And this time, the instructions are brutally clear. No wood. Hunt's early sketches show a structure that looks more like a fortress than a home. Thick stone walls, steel beams embedded deep in masonry, tile roofs, fireproof plaster, stone staircases that cannot burn. Even the door frames will be metal. The kitchen will be pushed into a separate wing, linked by fireproof passages. Every fireplace will be lined with multiple layers of brick and inspected before use. The message is absolute. Fire will not touch this house. But the cost of that security is enormous. The budget for the second breakers is reportedly $7 million in 1890s currency. Adjusted for inflation, that climbs past $200 million today. Most of that expense comes from the materials and the speed. Cornelius wants it finished fast. 2 years, no delays. Workers are brought in by the hundreds. Masons, carpenters, electricians, plasterers, painters. Temporary housing is built for them near the site. Shifts run long, from dark to dark. The pressure is constant. Hunt's designs are dense with detail. Every molding has a drawing. Every measurement matters. Every stone has to fit precisely. Maya looks at a photo dated 1894, midway through construction. The house is half finished. Walls up, roof partially complete. Scaffolding wraps the structure in ladders and planks. Workers dot every level. Some hauling stone, some guiding blocks into place with ropes. In the foreground, a supervisor stands with papers in hand, pointing toward the rising facade. Behind him, the shell of what will become the Great Hall rises like a cathedral of bare stone. She thinks about Brigid, who returned to work for the family after the fire, about a woman who watched the new house go up, stone by stone, and never needed anyone to explain why it was being built this way. Maya closes the archive file and starts drafting the next section of her script. She writes, "They built it to survive fire, but survival costs more than money." Chapter 4. Upstairs, gold, downstairs shadows. The house opened in the summer of 1895. Invitations went out to Newport's elite, Astors, Belmonts, other Vanderbilts. The Great Hall, finished at last, gleamed under gaslight. Marble columns rose nearly 30 feet. The ceiling, painted by Italian artists brought over specifically for the project, showed gods and clouds in colors so saturated they seemed to glow on their own. Furniture imported from Europe filled the rooms. Silk curtains, Persian rugs, chandeliers dripping crystal. Guests arrived in carriages, later in early automobiles. They walked through rooms engineered to impress, to overwhelm, to make sure everyone understood that the Vanderbilts had not just recovered from the fire, they had turned disaster into a stage for their return. But the house was not only the rooms the guests saw. Maya finds a service map, stored alongside the blueprints showing the hidden skeleton beneath the elegance. Servant staircases, narrow and steep, threading 4 floors, without ever cutting through the main halls. Service corridors running behind walls, allowing staff to move unseen. The kitchen, sealed off in its fireproof wing, connected to the dining room by a tiled tunnel meant for trays and footsteps, not guests. Downstairs, in the basement, a small city operated. Laundry rooms with industrial-sized tubs and long drying racks. Storage rooms for coal, for carefully stacked firewood despite all the new fire precautions, for linens, dishes, and the 1,000 small things required to keep a house this size running. Staff dining areas with plain tables and benches, walls bare. Sleeping quarters for some of the live-in servants, tight rooms with single beds, hooks for clothes, and not much else. Brigid's world was here. She is older now, mid-30s, promoted to head housemaid after years of service. Her days start at 5 in the morning. Fires must be lit in the family's rooms before they wake. Floors swept, dusted, polished, linens changed, chamber pots emptied. Breakfast served at 8, lunch at 1, dinner at 7. Between meals, the work never stops, windows washed, furniture rubbed to a shine, silver buffed until it reflects faces, carpets taken outside and beaten clean. The schedule is posted in the staff dining room, updated every week, every task assigned, every hour accounted for. 1 afternoon off per month. Church on Sunday mornings if your duties allow it. No visitors in your room. No fraternizing with male staff. Dismissal for pregnancy, illness that keeps you from work, or behavior the housekeeper decides is improper. Maya finds a staff ledger from 1896. Names listed by position: butler, footman, cooks, scullery maids, laundresses, gardeners, stable hands. Next to each name, a wage. The head butler earns $60 a month. Brigid, as head housemaid, earns $25. The scullery maids, the youngest and lowest ranked, earn $8. Some entries carry notes in the margin, written in careful script. Dismissed after illness, November. Left service, no notice. Replaced, December. No last names for most. Just first names and roles. Mary, cook. Thomas, footman. Brigid, housemaid. People reduced to positions on paper. Above them, the Vanderbilts live a different life. Alice wakes late, takes breakfast in her room, spends mornings in the music room or the library. She walks the cliff path, always accompanied, always perfectly dressed. She entertains in the afternoons, tea, conversation, planning for evening events. Dinner parties stretch for hours, course after course, wines chosen carefully, servants gliding silently between the table and the kitchen. The children have tutors, nurses, their own fixed routines. Gertrude, the eldest daughter, paints and sculpts in a studio set up for her on the 3rd floor. Cornelius III studies with private instructors. The younger ones play on the lawn, watched by staff, their games framed by ocean and stone. 2 worlds in one house. Maya films a modern tour of the service areas, now open to visitors on special preservation days. The staircases are still narrow. The corridors still bare. The kitchen, restored but empty, feels cold even in summer. A placard on the wall lists hours, wages, rules, like a quiet contract between comfort and the people who provided it. A guide tells the group, it took approximately 35 full-time staff to run the breakers during the season, more during parties. 35 people to maintain the illusion of effortless elegance. Maya turns the numbers over in her head. The Vanderbilts spent perhaps 3 months a year here. Summer season, June through August, sometimes stretching into September. The rest of the year, the house sat mostly empty. a skeleton staff keeping it polished, heated, repaired, always ready for the next arrival. She thinks about Brigid climbing those steep stairs every morning at 5. She thinks about guests in the great hall, champagne in hand, never seeing the fingers that cleaned their glasses. The tour moves on. Maya lingers in the service corridor, camera still recording. She whispers into the microphone, "Luxury is not effortless. Someone is always holding the weight." Chapter 5. A Palace of Grief. The weight broke Cornelius first. Maya finds the medical records buried in family archives, digitized and available to researchers with special permission. She requested access weeks ago. The file arrives as a PDF, roughly 70 pages, dense with doctor's notes, test results, and careful, formal correspondence. Cornelius Vanderbilt II suffered his first stroke in 1896, barely a year after the breakers opened. He was 53. The stroke was severe enough to require months of recovery. He could walk, but only with effort. His speech slurred. His right hand, the one he used to sign contracts and shake hands with presidents, trembled so badly that he sometimes could not hold a pen. Doctors recommended rest, calm, reduced stress. The recommendation was impossible. He was the head of the New York Central Railroad, the largest transportation network in America. He managed investments, properties, staff, and a sprawling web of family obligations. The pressure was constant. And now, after spending $7 million on a house built to protect him from fire, his own body was collapsing from the inside. Alice took over management of the breakers. She coordinated with the staff, planned events, maintained the social calendar. The house had to look perfect. That was not just vanity. That was survival. In Newport society, visible weakness was fatal. Families watched one another, measured one another, waited for signs of decline. If the Vanderbilts stumbled, others would step into the space they left. So Alice smiled. She hosted dinners while Cornelius recovered upstairs. She walked the cliff path with guests, pointing out the view, commenting on the sea breeze, discussing music and politics, never mentioning her husband's condition unless someone asked directly. When asked, she would say he was resting, improving, expected to rejoin them soon. He did not improve. In 1899, Cornelius suffered a second stroke. This one left him partially paralyzed. He spent his final months in a wheelchair, moved between rooms by servants, unable to speak clearly, able to watch but not lead. He died on September 12, 1899, at the breakers, in a bedroom overlooking the ocean he had paid so much to claim as a view. He was 55. Maya reads the obituaries. The New York Times gives him a full front-page story. The headline, "Cornelius Vanderbilt Dead." The head of the Vanderbilt family passes away at his summer home. The article lists his accomplishments, his wealth, his railroads, his properties. It mentions his widow and children. It does not mention the strokes, the long illness, the slow, humiliating unraveling of a powerful man. But grief was not new to this family. Maya digs further back. She finds records of earlier losses, the kind that were common in the 19th century, but no less devastating. The Vanderbilts lost children. Alice gave birth to 7. Not all survived. One son, William, died as an infant. Another, Reginald, would grow to adulthood but struggle with alcoholism and die young. The family tree is full of names that end too soon. There were whispers, even then, of a curse. Not a literal curse, not spells or superstition written down anywhere official. More a feeling, passed in low voices among the staff and repeated in society gossip, that the Vanderbilts were paying for their wealth in ways money could not repair. The fire, the strokes, the children buried too early, the constant grinding pressure that never let up. Brigid, still working as head housemaid, reportedly told another servant, "This house is beautiful, but it is not happy." The line appears in a memoir written decades later by a former staff member. It cannot be verified. There is no independent record, but it fits the pattern Maya sees in the documents. A palace on the surface, a string of private losses underneath. After Cornelius died, Alice continued to summer at the Breakers. She brought the children. She hosted events. She kept the routines going. She maintained appearances because stopping would have signaled defeat. But the house shifted. It grew quieter. Dinners became smaller. Guest lists shorter. The grand spectacles that defined the 1890s began to fade. Maya finds a photo from the summer of 1900, the first season after Cornelius's death. Alice stands on the front steps of the Breakers, alone, dressed in black mourning clothes. Behind her, the house looms, stone and glass and columns, unchanged by loss. She is not smiling. She looks directly at the camera, expression flat, hands folded in front of her. The caption reads, Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt II at her Newport residence. No mention of her husband. No mention of grief. Just the title and the place. As if that is all that matters. Maya saves the image and scrolls through more records. She finds staff logs from that same year. The daily routines continued without pause. Fires lit, floors polished, meals served on time. The house did not slow down for mourning. It could not. It required constant maintenance, constant work, constant bodies moving up and down stairs. The staff kept going because stopping was never an option, written on any schedule. She thinks about Alice walking through the great hall alone, surrounded by marble and gold that were supposed to prove something, supposed to secure something, supposed to last forever. Instead, she was a widow at 53, living in a palace that suddenly felt much too large. Maya closes her laptop and stares out her apartment window at the Brooklyn skyline, lights scattered across the dark like a different kind of Gilded Age. She thinks, they built it to survive fire, but they could not build it to survive grief. Chapter 6. Gilded Summers, Tired Hands. Grief did not stop the season. The Breakers opened every June. Staff arrived weeks early to prepare. Dust covers came off. Windows were washed until they vanished in the light. Gardens clipped back into shape. By the time the family appeared at the front door, the house had to look as if it had been waiting all year, frozen in perfection, just for them. Alice continued the tradition. Through the early 1900s, through the years after Cornelius's death, she returned each summer. Her children came with her, now older, some married, some bringing children of their own. The house filled again. Not with the roaring showpiece parties of the 1890s, but with family gatherings, smaller dinners, afternoon teas on the loggia looking over the Atlantic. Newport society still watched. Other families raised their own palaces along the cliffs, Marble House, Rosecliff, the Elms. The competition was quiet but relentless. Who had the most celebrated architect, the most extravagant interiors? The guest list people whispered about. The Vanderbilts remained near the top, but holding that position took more and more effort every year. Maya finds a household expense ledger from 1905. The numbers are staggering. Staff wages alone run to more than $15,000 per year. Food and supplies add another $10,000. Maintenance, repairs, coal for heating, gas for lighting push the total up by roughly $20,000 more. Insurance, property taxes, groundskeeping sit on top of that. Altogether, the house costs around $60,000 a year to operate. For roughly 3 months of actual use. $60,000 in 1905, well over $2 million in today's money. And that still does not include the cost of entertaining, of wardrobes, of travel, of all the invisible spending needed just to occupy a house like this and keep a place on the social ladder. Brigid is still there. Now in her late 40s, still head housemaid, still climbing the service stairs every morning before dawn. Her hands, according to a brief note in a younger staff member's diary, are stiff with arthritis. 2 decades of scrubbing stone and polishing silver have worn the joints down. But she works. She has to. A post at the breakers means steady pay, and steady pay is rare. The diary, written by a younger maid named Catherine, sketches a typical day in the summer of 1908. Wake at 5 in the morning. Light fires in the family bedrooms. Lay out clothing chosen the night before. Prepare wash water and towels. Return to the servants' quarters for breakfast around 6:30. Back upstairs at 7 to begin chamber work. Emptying chamber pots, making beds, tidying rooms. Then dust and sweep the main halls. Polish brass fixtures until they shine. Check that fresh flowers stand in every occupied room. Lunch at noon in the servants' hall. Bread, soup, cold meat. 15 minutes. Afternoon tasks, sorting and mending laundry, preparing guest rooms for arrivals, expected later in the week. Tea service at 4 in the afternoon, which means setting out china and linens, arranging trays, carrying hot pots up from the kitchen. Dinner service begins at 7 in the evening. Staff eat only after the family and guests have finished, sometimes not until 10 at night. Bed around 11. Up again at 5. 1 afternoon off per month. No exceptions unless illness makes work impossible. And illness often leads straight to dismissal. Catherine writes, "Brigid told me this is easier than it used to be. I cannot imagine what used to be was like." Above stairs, life moves to a different rhythm. Alice's daughter Gertrude, now a young woman, spends her summers painting, hosting, attending dances at other Newport estates. She goes to balls, receives callers, plans outfits, travels to Europe in the off-season. She will later become a respected sculptor and philanthropist. But in these years, she is still learning how to perform the role her class expects. Her younger brother, Cornelius III, works on family business interests, learning the railroad systems his father once controlled. He marries, has children, brings them to the breakers each summer. Another generation runs on the same lawn, plays the same lawn games, poses for the same kinds of photographs. The house looks timeless. That is the point. Grand architecture, classical lines, stone and marble meant to outlast everyone who lives inside. Walk through the breakers in 1895 or 1910, and you would see almost the same thing. The same great hall, the same staircase, the same view of the ocean beyond the lawn. But underneath, the strain is visible in the records. Staff turnover climbs. Younger workers, especially recent immigrants who once filled domestic positions, are discovering other choices. Factories pay similar wages with fewer rules. You can walk out the door at the end of your shift. You can choose your own room, your own evenings. You do not have to sleep beneath your employer's roof and wake before sunrise for someone else's schedule. Brigid trains new maids constantly. They stay for a season, maybe 2, then leave for jobs in town. The work is too hard, the hours too long, the pay too small for what the house demands from their bodies. Alice notices. She has to. A household like this only runs smoothly when the staff know their roles by heart, and people who know their roles are getting harder to replace. Maya films the servants' quarters on the preservation tour. The rooms are small, just large enough for a narrow bed and a chair. Some have no windows at all. The hallways between them are tight and unadorned, painted a flat, practical white. The contrast with the gilded ceilings and marble upstairs is so sharp that visitors often fall silent when they step through the doorway. The guide tells the group, service was considered an honor, but it was also exhausting. Maya thinks about Brigid's hands, swollen and aching, still wrapped around a polishing cloth at 48. She thinks about Catherine's diary, the 15-minute lunch, the 5 in the morning wake-up, repeated day after day, summer after summer. She thinks about that word, honor, and who actually paid the price for it. Chapter 7. War, Water, and the Family Curse. The world shifted in 1914. War broke out in Europe. At first it felt distant, headlines from another continent, a problem for other nations, other families. The Vanderbilts kept their summers at the breakers. Guests still arrived. Dinners still happened. The routine held. But the war edged closer. In 1915, a German submarine torpedoed the RMS Lusitania off the coast of Ireland. The ship sank in 18 minutes. Nearly 1,200 people died. Among them was Alfred Vanderbilt, Cornelius's younger brother, one of the wealthiest men in America. He was 37. Survivors later described him giving his life jacket to a young mother and staying on deck as the ship went down. Newspapers called him a hero. The family called him gone. Alice received the news at the breakers. Maya finds a letter she wrote to a friend shortly afterward, archived in a private collection and later donated. The handwriting is steady, controlled. Alice writes, "We have endured much, but this feels different. The ocean, which we have always loved, has taken someone dear." The sea outside the breakers, once a perfect backdrop, now carried a different weight. Staff noticed the change. Brigid, according to Catherine's diary, mentioned that Mrs. Vanderbilt no longer walked the cliff path alone. She avoided the loggia, where she used to take her morning tea. The view that had sold the house now looked more like a threat than an ornament. The whispers about a curse grew louder, not openly, never in front of the family, but in the servants' quarters, in corridors after the household went to bed. The idea circulated. The fire, Cornelius's strokes, the children who died young, now Alfred, drowned at sea. Some staff, especially those who had been with the Vanderbilts for years, began to see patterns where others might see coincidence. Catherine writes, "Brigid says the house is unlucky. She says stone cannot protect you from fate. I do not know if I believe in curses, but I know this family has suffered." The war reached America in 1917. Young men enlisted or were drafted. Footmen, gardeners, stable hands left for military service. Some never returned. Catherine's diary ends abruptly in May of that year. The last entry mentions her brother joining the army. There are no further pages. Whether she left service, moved away, or simply stopped writing, the records do not say. The house carried on with fewer people. Rooms that once were dusted and polished every day were now cleaned weekly. Some guest bedrooms stayed closed for entire seasons, furniture draped in sheets, shutters drawn. The breakers began to feel less like a summer palace and more like a huge house straining to maintain an old idea of itself. Alice was in her 70s now. She still came to Newport, but her stays grew shorter. The social calendar thinned. Other families faced similar pressures. Sons and nephews were overseas. Servants were scarce. The elaborate parties that had defined the Gilded Age were dissolving under the weight of a modern war. Maya finds photographs from 1918, the last year of the fighting. One shows the Great Hall, empty, sunlight slanting through the windows onto floors that look slightly dusty. No guests, no activity. Just space and light. Another shows the front lawn, grass grown a little too long, hedges trimmed but not razor sharp. The standards have slipped. Not dramatically, but enough that anyone who remembered the old days would see the difference. The war ended in November 1918. But the world that came after was not the world that had built the breakers. The social structures, the certainties, the quiet belief that wealth and lineage were permanent, all of it was cracking. Brigid retired in 1919. Maya finds a brief note in a staff record. Brigid Callahan, head housemaid, retired after 27 years of service. Pension provided. 27 years? From the night of the fire to the year after the war ended. She would have been around 51, though records of her exact age conflict. Her hands, back, and knees worn down by almost 3 decades of stairs, stone, and soap. The pension is listed as $50 a month, enough to live on, barely. Brigid moved to a boarding house in Providence. She died in 1923, 4 years of retirement after 27 years of service. Maya sits with that number, 4 years. She looks again at the photograph of the empty Great Hall, light on dusty floors, and thinks about all the bodies that once moved through that space to keep the marble shining, the curtains straight, the illusion intact. The curse, if there was one, was not supernatural. It was simpler. It was the belief that money and stone could hold back time, that a fortune could protect a family from loss, that you could pour grief into limestone and marble and turn it into something permanent. The ocean outside kept moving, the world kept changing, and the breakers, for all its strength, could not stop either. Chapter 8: Taxes, Unions, and the Shrinking Servant Class. The numbers stopped working after the war. Maya pulls up estate records from the 1920s, now accessible through historical archives. The expenses at the breakers stay almost unchanged: maintenance, staff, utilities, taxes. But the income that once covered those bills is shrinking. In 1916, the federal government introduces a new tax, the estate tax. Wealth passed from one generation to the next will now be taxed. The rate for the largest fortunes starts around 10% and climbs. By the 1920s, the top rate reaches roughly 40%. 40% of an estate gone before heirs see a single dollar. The Vanderbilt fortune, already divided among Cornelius's children after his death, divides again with each generation. What had been a single, massive concentration of money in the Commodore's hands in the 1870s is now split among dozens of descendants, each inheritance smaller than the last, each new heir facing higher taxes on what remains. The breakers cost more to operate than many of those heirs can realistically afford. Alice still owns the house. She is now in her 80s, spending less time in Newport every year. The summer season shrinks. Some years she arrives in July and leaves by mid-August, 6 weeks instead of 3 months. The rest of the year, a skeleton staff keeps the place from decaying. But even a skeleton staff costs money, and finding that staff is harder than it has ever been. The war has changed expectations. Young people who might have entered domestic service before 1914 now have options. Factories are hiring. Offices need clerks and typists. Shops want salespeople. Unions are organizing in mills and plants, pushing for higher wages and shorter days. The pay in these jobs is often similar to what a servant earns, but the conditions feel entirely different. You work 8 hours and go home. You get regular Sundays off, not one afternoon a month if the schedule allows it. You are not living under the constant eye of your employer, sleeping in a room they own, following rules posted on their wall. Brigid's niece, Ellen, chooses a textile factory in Fall River over a housemaid position at the breakers. Catherine's diary had mentioned her once, describing her as sharp and quick, would do well in service. Ellen disagrees. She has other plans. Maya finds an oral history interview conducted in the 1970s with Ellen. By then, in her 80s. Ellen explains the decision without drama. I could have gone to Newport like my aunt. Good family, steady work, but I wanted my own life. At the factory, I finished at 5, and the time was mine. I could go to the cinema. I could meet friends. I was not polishing someone else's silver until midnight. The staff dining room at the breakers, once full and noisy, now has empty chairs. Positions go unfilled. The work is spread across whoever stays, one person doing the job of 2, sometimes of 3. Standards slip again. Rooms are cleaned less often. Minor repairs wait longer. The house, designed to be flawless, starts to show small cracks. Paint peels in the service corridors. Wallpaper loosens at the seams. Fine lines spider through plaster. Nothing a casual guest in the Great Hall would notice yet, but obvious to anyone who lives and works in the back hallways. Alice notices. She has to. Estate records show attempts to trim costs. Staff wages are adjusted on paper, but not meaningfully raised. Certain roles disappear entirely. The head gardener's job is cut back to part-time. Laundry is sent out instead of washed in the house's big tubs. Dozens of small savings. None dramatic alone, but all necessary. Other Newport families face the same math. Some sell their estates outright. Marble House is leased to another family. Rosecliff changes owners. The Elms is sold after its original owner dies. The huge houses that defined the Gilded Age are being abandoned or passed on because the people who built them, or their children, can no longer justify the cost of keeping them. The Breakers stays in Vanderbilt hands, but the strain is obvious in the paperwork. Maya finds a letter from Alice to her daughter Gertrude, dated 1925. Alice writes, "The house is too large for the use we make of it, yet I cannot bring myself to part with it. Your father built it to last, and I feel I owe it to his memory to see that it does." Obligation, not joy. The house has become a duty, a monument that must be preserved because letting it go would feel like betraying a promise. Gertrude, now a successful sculptor and philanthropist, reportedly suggests turning part of the estate into an art gallery or museum, opening the doors, at least partially, to the public. Alice refuses. The Breakers is a private home. It will remain a private home. But the question is out in the open now. What do you do with a palace when you can no longer afford it, but cannot bear to lose it? Maya stands outside the Breakers during her research trip, looking up at the facade. Tourists move past her, phones raised, capturing quick photos before moving on to the next attraction. She thinks about Alice in the 1920s, walking those same halls, feeling the pressure of a house that has outgrown its time and its purpose. The stone is still strong, the structure still sound, but the world it was built for is gone, and the family holding on to it is running out of options. Chapter 9. From private palace to public tour. Alice Vanderbilt died in 1934. She was 89. She had outlived her husband by 35 years, outlived several of her children, and outlived the world. The Breakers was built to impress. The house passed to her youngest daughter, Gladys, Countess Szechenyi, who had married a Hungarian aristocrat and spent most of her time in Europe. Gladys inherited a palace she barely used. The Great Depression was grinding through its fifth year. Unemployment hovered near 25%. Banks failed. Fortunes vanished in months. The Vanderbilt wealth, already thinned by taxes and inheritance splits, shrank further. Keeping the Breakers going shifted from difficult to nearly impossible. The annual operating cost had not fallen. If anything, it had crept upward. Repairs could not be postponed forever. Roofs leaked. Stone joints failed and needed repointing. Salt air from the Atlantic chewed at metal and warped wood. Even a house built to withstand fire needed constant work just to withstand time. Gladys faced a choice: sell the house and accept whatever came next. Demolition, subdivision, conversion into apartments, or find another model altogether. All around her, other estates were disappearing. In the 1930s and 1940s, Newport watched mansion after mansion come down. In many cases, the land was worth more than the buildings. Developers bought properties, leveled the great houses, and replaced them with smaller homes or apartment blocks. The era of the private palace was ending under the weight of taxes, maintenance, and changed taste. The Breakers survived because of a compromise. In 1948, Gladys leased the house to the Preservation Society of Newport County for $1 per year. The society would open the first and second floors to the public as a museum. They would take on maintenance, repairs, and staffing. In return, Gladys and her family could continue to use the third floor during summer, keeping a private apartment inside the house their family had built. The public would pay to come through the front door. Maya finds the original lease agreement scanned and digitized. The language is formal but clear. The Preservation Society assumes responsibility for all public areas. The family retains private quarters upstairs, ticket revenue funds, upkeep, and restoration. No one gets rich off the arrangement, but both sides keep the building standing. On July 31, 1948, the breakers opened to the public for the first time. Tickets cost $1. Lines formed outside the gates. Teachers, factory workers, nurses, shopkeepers, people who never would have received invitations during the Gilded Age, now walked up the same drive, paid their $1, and stepped into the Great Hall. Maya finds a newspaper article from opening day. The reporter describes crowds moving slowly beneath the painted ceiling, heads tilted back, hands brushing the marble columns as if to check they are real. One visitor, a school teacher from Providence, is quoted, "I never thought I would see the inside of a place like this. It is like stepping into a history book." Not everyone saw only magic. Some of the former staff, now elderly, came back for the opening. A few were hired as guides, narrating rooms they once cleaned. Others simply wanted to see the house again, this time as visitors, not as workers slipping up the back stairs. Ellen, Brigid's niece, attended opening day. In her oral history interview, she remembers walking into the servants' quarters, now included on special tours. "I stood in the room my aunt lived in for 27 years. It was tiny, cold. The tour guide talked about how hard the staff worked, and people seemed surprised. I was not surprised. The house had become a story about itself, not just a tale of the Vanderbilts and their parties, and not just an architecture lecture. The narrative now had to include the whole structure, wealth and labor, beauty and cost, the rooms upstairs, and the narrow corridors below." Attendance climbed year after year. By the 1950s, tens of thousands of people were walking through the breakers annually. Ticket prices rose from $1 to $2, then to $5. The income covered routine maintenance and began funding deeper restorations. Rooms that had been shuttered for decades were reopened and carefully restored to their earlier appearance. Gladys continued using the third floor in summer until her death in 1965. After that, the entire house passed fully into museum use. The private apartment closed. The last direct Vanderbilt claim to the breakers as a residence ended. Maya films in the Welcome Center, built in the early 2000s to handle the modern crowds. It sits away from the mansion, low and unobtrusive. Visitors buy tickets there, find restrooms, grab water, and then walk up the long approach to the house. When the project was first proposed, some Vanderbilt descendants objected. One told a local paper, "It looks like a visitor center at a state park, not an entrance to a family home." But the breakers was no longer a family home. It was a monument, a lesson, a set of rooms turned into a question about how a country once treated money, labor, and status. Hundreds of thousands of people a year now come here not to be seen, but to see. To try to understand an era that built houses it could not keep. The house survived because it stopped being private. That is the thought Maya keeps circling back to. The Vanderbilts built it. The public saved it. Chapter 10. The Welcome Center War. The public saved the house, but not everyone agreed on how. Maya finds records of public meetings from the early 2000s, when the Preservation Society proposed building a new Welcome Center on the grounds. The existing setup was bare bones. Visitors waited in long lines with no shelter from sun or rain. Bathrooms were few. There was nowhere to buy water or sit in the shade. The breakers drew more than 400,000 visitors a year, and the infrastructure was cracking under the load. The idea on paper was simple: a modern building set back from the mansion, tucked into the landscape with ticketing, restrooms, a small cafe, and educational displays. The backlash was immediate. Some Vanderbilt descendants, though none of them lived in the house anymore, spoke out publicly. Letters appeared in the Newport Daily News, one written by a great-great-grandchild of Cornelius, called The Welcome Center a commercial intrusion on sacred ground. Another warned that it was turning a family legacy into a theme park. Community meetings turned tense. Preservation Society staff argued that without modern amenities, the breakers could not stay open in a practical way. Crowds would shrink, revenue would fall, maintenance would be cut. The decision, they said, was not between a welcome center and no welcome center. It was between a welcome center and a slow decline. Opponents countered that the estate itself was the artifact, and any modern addition near it chipped away at its integrity. They cited other historic houses that managed without large visitor centers. They questioned whether 400,000 people a year were really necessary, or if fewer, more carefully managed visitors would be better for the building and for the town. Underneath the zoning language and design drawings, the fight was about ownership. Who did the breakers belong to now? Was it still, in some moral sense, a Vanderbilt legacy that should remain as untouched as possible, even at the cost of limiting access? Or had it become a public resource, held in trust for everyone who now paid to keep it standing, and therefore allowed to adapt to the needs of the present? Maya reads through op-eds, letters to the editor, and transcripts of planning commission hearings. The tone is sharp, sometimes personal. One preservationist writes, "The Vanderbilts are gone. The house remains because we chose to save it. We have earned the right to make it work for the present, not just the past." A descendant replies, "My family built this house. Your ticket price does not erase that. Respect costs nothing." The Preservation Society moves ahead. Environmental and visual impact studies are commissioned. Architects revise drawings again and again to address complaints. The final plan puts the Welcome Center roughly 300 feet from the mansion, partially sunk into the ground, with a green roof to blend into the landscape. Native plantings are used to screen it from view as visitors approach the house. The building itself is deliberately plain. No fake Gilded Age flourishes, just straightforward contemporary design. Construction begins in the year 2006. Protests continue. A small group of descendants and supporters stand outside the gates with signs: "Preserve, don't commercialize." Local television covers it. National outlets pick up the story. For a short time, the Breakers is back in the news not for its marble or its parties, but for an argument over a bathroom and a cafe. The Welcome Center opens in the year 2009. Maya visits it on her research trip. It is, as promised, unobtrusive. From the mansion, you barely notice it. Inside, it is bright, efficient, and crowded. Families buy tickets at the counters. Children dart toward the restrooms. Elderly visitors sit on benches to catch their breath. A small cafe sells coffee, sandwiches, and bottled water. Along one wall, panels explain the history of the Breakers, the Gilded Age, and the people who built and worked in the house. She watches a school group cluster near the exit doors. The teacher reminds them to stay together, listen to the guide, and be respectful. The kids are buzzing with questions. One asks if they will see the bedrooms. Another quietly asks if the house is haunted. The guide smiles and leads them along the path toward the mansion. Maya thinks about the years of meetings and letters, the accusations of theme park and sacred ground. She wonders if the loudest opponents ever come here now, if they see what this building actually does. Not cheapen the house, enable it. Without these restrooms, without this shade, without a place to buy a drink on a hot day, fewer people would come. Without people, there would be no ticket revenue. Without revenue, A stone giant on a windy cliff would slowly peel, crack, and rot. The equation is simple. The emotions around it are not. She films the steady flow of visitors moving between the welcome center and the mansion, families with strollers, retirees with cameras, teenagers taking selfies on the lawn. Some are deeply engaged, reading every plaque. Others just want a pretty background for a photo. All of them paid to cross the threshold. All of them, in a small way, are inheriting a slice of something the Vanderbilts themselves could not hold on to. Later, recording voiceover in her apartment, Maya sums up the paradox. The family fought to keep the house private. The public fought to keep it open. Both believed they were protecting it. Maybe they both were. She packs her camera after that last visit and walks toward the mansion for one more tour. Already thinking about the closing chapters, the part where she has to tie all of these threads together. Chapter 11. Voices in the Archive. The tour ends, but Maya's work does not. She requests access to the Preservation Society's research library, housed in a quiet building a few blocks from the breakers. The archivist, a woman in her early 60s named Patricia, leads her into a climate-controlled room lined with gray boxes and metal filing cabinets. The air smells faintly of paper and dust. "What are you looking for?" Patricia asks. Maya hesitates. "The people no one remembers." Patricia nods, as if she has heard this answer before, and pulls 3 boxes from a shelf. Inside are letters, photographs, employment records. Some pages are fragile, yellowed at the edges. Others are photocopies of documents held in distant collections. Patricia explains that the Preservation Society has been gathering staff histories for decades, interviewing descendants, copying anything that survived in attics and family trunks. Maya opens the first box. On top lies a letter dated 1897, written in careful, slanting script. The author introduces herself as Mary Donahue, a scullery maid. She is writing to her sister in Ireland, describing her first months at the breakers. "The work is harder than I expected, but the pay is steady. I wake before the sun and do not stop until after dark. My hands are red and raw from the washing, but I am told they will toughen. The house is beautiful, though I see only the parts where we work. The family passes sometimes, but they do not speak to us. We are like the furniture. Necessary, but invisible." Maya reads the letter twice, tracing the ink with her eyes. She photographs it with her phone. Writes a note in her notebook, "Necessary, but invisible," underlined. Another letter sits just beneath it, dated 1903, written by a footman named Thomas to his brother in Boston. "Mrs. Vanderbilt is fair, though distant. The butler is strict. We are not permitted to speak unless spoken to when upstairs. Yesterday I was reprimanded for making eye contact with a guest. I do not understand these rules, but I follow them. The alternative is dismissal, and I have nowhere else to go." The letters pile up. Some describe small kindnesses: a Christmas bonus, an unexpected afternoon off, a kind word from Alice during an illness. Others record the harsh edges of the job: wages docked for minor mistakes, dismissals with no warning, exhaustion so deep that sleep feels like a short pause between shifts. Maya opens the second box and finds a photograph. It shows the staff of the breakers gathered on the front lawn, dated around 1910, 37 people in total. The butler and housekeeper stand in the center, the rest arranged by rank. Housemaids in the back row, footmen and gardeners in the middle, kitchen staff to one side. Everyone wears uniforms. No one smiles. Patricia leans over Maya's shoulder. "That is one of the only group photos we have. Staff photographs were rare. The families did not think to document them." Maya studies the faces one by one. Brigid is there, third from the left in the back row. She looks worn, shoulders straight, hands folded in front of her, eyes focused somewhere past the camera. Next to her stands a younger woman, possibly Catherine, though the grainy resolution makes it hard to be sure. Maya sets the photo aside carefully and opens the third box. Inside are legal documents, contracts, payroll ledgers, termination notices. The language is cold and clipped. Dismissed for unsatisfactory performance. Left service without notice. Wages reduced due to breakage. Lives flatten into a few lines of ink. One ledger lists names and wages for the year 1920. Maya scans the columns until she finds Brigid's entry near the top. B. Callahan, head housemaid, $30 per month. Below her are a dozen more names, most earning between $8 and $20 a month. She does the math in the margin. $30 in 1920 is roughly $450 in today's money, for a month of work, for 6-day weeks, 15-hour days. Patricia watches her calculate and fills the silence. The numbers shock people, but that was standard. Domestic service was considered respectable, even desirable. It was steady. You had housing, meals. Many alternatives paid less, or offered no security at all. Maya nods, but the numbers sit heavy anyway. She thinks about Ellen, who chose the textile factory over the breakers because she wanted time of her own. About Mary's raw, burning hands. About Thomas, afraid to look a guest in the eye. About Brigid's tired gaze in that lawn photograph. Upstairs, the house gleamed with gold and marble. Down here, in these cardboard boxes, the cost of that shine is written out in faded ink and formal handwriting. Maya closes the third box carefully and thanks Patricia. Outside, the afternoon light feels almost too bright after the dim archive room. She has what she came for now: the voices, the names, the wages, the rules, the pieces that turn a palace back into a workplace. The story of the breakers is not just the Vanderbilts. It is everyone who made the illusion function, everyone who polished the marble, lit the fires, carried the trays, and then slipped out of the frame because no one thought they mattered enough to remember. Until now. Chapter 12. Preservation in Progress. Maya returns to the breakers the next morning for a different kind of tour. The Preservation Society offers specialized access for researchers and filmmakers. Patricia has arranged it. A conservator named David meets Maya at a side entrance, away from the public flow. He wears work clothes, carries a clipboard, and moves with the ease of someone who knows every inch of the building. "We will start on the 3rd floor," he says. "That is where most of the active work happens." They climb a narrow staircase, not the grand main stairs the tours use, but a service route. The walls here are plain. No wallpaper, no gilding, just plaster and the occasional pencil mark left by workers long gone. The 3rd floor is a revelation. Rooms stand empty. Furniture removed. Scaffolding fills one hallway. Drop cloths cover the floors. Conservators work quietly, methodically. One kneels beside a wall, carefully lifting away layers of old wallpaper with a small blade and tweezers. Another photographs damage to a plaster medallion on the ceiling, then notes measurements on a tablet. As they walk, David narrates, "The public sees the finished rooms," he says. "They see 1895, or what we have reconstructed to resemble 1895. Up here we see everything else. The repairs, the compromises, the choices we make every day, about what to save and what to let go." He stops at a doorway. Inside, a bedroom has been stripped to bare walls. Patches of different paint colors dot the surface like a grid. Pencil labels beneath each swatch list pigments, dates, sources. "We are repainting this room based on archival research," he explains. "We found photographs, paint samples, even invoices from the original decorators. But the exact shade is still a best estimate. Paint fades, light shifts it. We test several formulas and choose the one that feels closest to what it would have been. Maya films while he talks, then asks how they decide when to stop testing. We aim for authenticity, but we also have to think about durability, David says. Modern paints last longer, handle humidity better. We use period-appropriate colors with contemporary materials. Visitors do not notice the chemistry. The house does. They move on to another room where a section of ceiling has been removed, exposing dark wooden beams beneath the plaster. David points to a series of deep stains. Water damage, he says. Probably from the 1950s or 1960s when the house sat mostly empty. The roof leaked. No one addressed it right away. By the time the Preservation Society took full control, some of this was already done. We repair what we can. We document what we cannot. The work is slow, precise, and expensive. David pulls out his tablet and scrolls to a budget projection. The Breakers needs approximately $3 million every year just for basic maintenance and conservation. That figure does not include major projects, such as the roof replacement completed in the year 2015, which cost an additional $5 million. Ticket revenue covers most of it, David says. Donations and grants fill in the gaps. Without public access, this house would not survive. The math is blunt. They descend to the second floor, following a staff corridor that suddenly opens into one of the grand bedrooms. The transition is jarring. Plain walls on one side of the doorway, gilded surfaces, and heavy drapes on the other. David pauses in the threshold. This is what the house has always been, he says. Two worlds, side by side. We preserve both now. Not only the marble and gold, but the service stairs, the plain halls, the infrastructure that made the splendor work. Maya asks if that has always been the philosophy. No, he admits. Early restorations focused almost entirely on the showpiece rooms, the public spaces. Over time, we realized that left half the story untold. Now we include servant spaces on tours. We talk about wages, working conditions, the people who lived here and were never meant to be seen. He leads her into a small exhibit installed in what used to be the housekeeper's office. On the walls hang enlarged staff photographs and copied employment records. A recreated housemaid's uniform sits on a mannequin. A placard breaks down daily routines, pay scales, and the reality of domestic service in the Gilded Age. Visitors drift through, reading quietly. Some take photos of the uniform, others glance at the text and move on quickly, uncomfortable or uninterested. David watches them for a moment. Not everyone wants this part, he says softly. They come for the fairy tale. We give them history instead. That can be a harder sell. Maya thanks him and steps back into the corridor. She films the hallway, the pivot point where plain plaster gives way to ornament, the thin border between beauty and the labor that maintained it. She thinks about the conservators upstairs, working in stripped rooms, making careful decisions about paint, plaster, and what counts as original enough. About David's line that preservation is not freezing time, but choosing what the present decides to inherit. The house is not a ruin. It is alive in a way, but it needs constant care, constant funding, constant attention from people whose names will never be as famous as Vanderbilt, and may never be remembered any more than Brigid's was. The difference now, Maya thinks, is that at least we say their work out loud. Now we try to tell the entire story. She walks back toward the great hall, camera still recording, already thinking about the final chapters and how to pull all of these threads together. Chapter 13. The Mansion as a Mirror. The cliff walk runs along the eastern edge of the property. It predates the Breakers, predates the Vanderbilt era entirely. A public right-of-way laid out in the colonial period and somehow preserved through centuries of private development. From here you get the clearest view of the house, from outside its gates. Stone facade, ocean behind it, a scale that photographs never quite capture. The view pulls in thousands of people every day. Tourists stop, raise their phones, grab a few shots, and move on. Very few stay longer than a few minutes. The house itself reveals different things to different viewers. For some, it represents achievement, visible proof that ambition and capital can build something that feels permanent. The Vanderbilts came from almost nothing. The Commodore started as a ferry operator, and within 2 generations the family built this. That story fits a certain version of American possibility. For others, the house represents exploitation. 70 rooms maintained by roughly 35 staff members earning between $8 and $60 a month. Luxury, bought with other people's labor, other people's exhausted bodies. That reading is just as grounded in fact. Both perspectives appear in the historical record. Contemporary accounts from the 1890s describe the breakers in glowing terms. Architecture journals praised Richard Morris Hunt's design. Society pages covered the dinners and balls. The house was presented as an uncomplicated triumph, evidence of American prosperity, taste, and power. But other voices at the time were less impressed. Labor newspapers attacked the Vanderbilts as symbols of excess. Union organizers pointed to the wages of railroad workers and domestic staff and set them against the cost of these summer cottages. Editorials questioned whether such concentrations of wealth served any public good at all. The debate never really stopped. Modern visitor responses, captured in comment cards, online reviews, and social media posts, show the same split. Some people describe the house as inspiring, beautiful, a work of art worth preserving at any cost. Others call it disturbing, a monument to inequality that feels wrong to admire. The Preservation Society has adjusted how it tells the story over the decades. When public tours began in 1948, the script focused almost entirely on the family and the architecture. Guides talked about the Vanderbilts' lives, the imported stone and marble, the famous decorators. Servants appeared, if at all, as a brief mention, part of the background mechanism. By the 1980s, that started to change. Labor history was gaining attention in universities. Museums everywhere were rethinking whose stories they centered. The breakers added more information about staff, opened servant spaces on some tours, and began naming workers instead of treating them as anonymous. Today, guides try to walk a line. They talk about the Vanderbilt family and the grandeur of the design, but they also point out service corridors and staff staircases, read out wage charts, and describe working conditions. In the gift shop, books on Gilded Age architecture now sit beside books on Gilded Age labor. Whether that balance satisfies anyone is another question. Some visitors want the fairy tale. They come for beauty, for a short escape into another world, for the pleasure of imagining what it would feel like to live here. Talks about exploitation and class can feel, to them, like someone turning on the lights at the end of a movie. Other visitors arrive already skeptical. They want accountability, language that names harm and power. For them, long descriptions of ballrooms and tapestries without a discussion of who paid the real price can feel dishonest or even offensive. The house itself does not resolve that tension. It stands as it was built: marble, stone, gilt, and glass. The materials do not shift depending on the story told about them. The Great Hall is impressive whether you read it as art or as evidence of excess. The service stairs are narrow and steep, whether anyone mentions them or not. What changes is context. A visitor in 1895 would likely have seen the breakers as normal, even expected. Rich families built big houses. Staff ran them. That was the social order. Questioning it out loud would have seemed strange or rude in most circles. A visitor in the year 2025 arrives with different assumptions. Conversations about wealth inequality, labor rights, and historical responsibility now live in the background of everyday life. The same building triggers different questions. In the Preservation Society's archives, thousands of visitor comments span more than 75 years. The words change, the worries change, but certain patterns repeat. People want to know, were the Vanderbilts happy? The question appears over and over on cards, in online reviews, in tours, when someone finally raises a hand. The underlying idea seems to be that wealth this visible must have produced either great happiness or great misery, and that deciding between those two options matters. The record suggests something less dramatic. The Vanderbilts experienced joy and grief, like any large family. They had advantages most people never see. They also lived with pressures and expectations most people never face. Cornelius died at 55. Alice spent decades as a widow. Their children scattered across marriages, continents, and different fortunes. The money thinned out with each generation. Whether that counts as happiness is not really a historical question. It is a philosophical one. What history can say with confidence is this: the breakers cost around $7 million to build. It required about 35 full-time staff to operate during the season. It served as a summer residence for roughly 3 months each year. It stayed in family hands for only about 50 years before financial and social pressures forced the Vanderbilts to lease it to a preservation organization. The house survived. The fortune did not. That contrast alone says something about permanence, about what money can buy, what it cannot protect, and the difference between building something impressive and keeping it. The sun moves across the sky. Visitors keep arriving, walking the paths, snapping photos. The ocean keeps hammering the rocks below the cliff walk. The house stands, as it has for more than a century, waiting for the next wave of people to decide what it means. History does not hand out answers. It hands out evidence. What people do with that evidence depends on what they bring with them when they step through the gate. Chapter 14. Premiere Night and the New Story. The video appears on a Saturday evening in late autumn. 28 minutes long, noticeably longer than most history content on the platform. The title is blunt and clear: The Breakers, the dark cost of America's most expensive mansion. The thumbnail shows the Great Hall at dusk, light slanting through tall windows, striking but not sensationalized. Initial response is immediate. Within the first hour, the view count climbs past 10,000. YouTube's system locks onto the metrics. Average watch time above 20 minutes means most viewers are staying nearly to the end. By midnight, views pass 50,000. By morning, they cross 200,000. Comments accumulate rapidly. The range is wide. Educational institutions are among the first to respond. High school and college history teachers mark the video for classroom use. Several write that the balance between architecture and labor history fills a gap in the material they usually have. One educator comments, "Most resources either glorify or condemn. This does neither. It documents." Descendants of domestic workers add family stories. Multiple comments describe grandparents or great-grandparents who worked in Newport mansions. One viewer recognizes a relative in one of the archival photographs used in the video. Another explains that, after watching, they searched their family papers and discovered employment records they never knew existed. Academic historians weigh in as well. Some praise the depth of research and clear sourcing. Others point out small inaccuracies or necessary simplifications in a video aimed at a general audience. Overall, the tone from professional historians is positive, with several sharing the video through academic networks and social media. Preservation professionals respond publicly. Conservators and museum staff from other historic house museums write about how familiar these challenges feel, trying to tell complicated stories to visitors who expect something simpler. One commenter, working at a comparable estate, Dark State describes the same struggle to balance accessibility and historical honesty. Criticism arrives too. Some viewers object to the emphasis on labor and inequality, arguing that architectural and artistic achievements should be celebrated regardless of the conditions that produce them. They insist that judging Gilded Age families by contemporary moral standards is unfair and anachronistic. Others criticize from the opposite side, arguing that any effort to preserve Gilded Age mansions as heritage inevitably softens or excuses the inequality behind them. A number of comments suggest that these houses should have been demolished instead of turned into museums. Political readings appear quickly. Some viewers frame the video as an argument for specific modern policies on wealth taxes or labor rights. Others push back, insisting it should be seen as historical storytelling, not a policy manifesto. The video becomes a mirror for present-day politics as much as for past events. The Preservation Society of Newport County posts a short public statement on social media, acknowledging the video and thanking the creator for careful research and a balanced narrative. They note a measurable spike in ticket inquiries in the days after the release. Within 2 weeks, the view count passes 1 million. Traffic to the Breakers website rises noticeably. Tour bookings increase, especially for the specialized tours of servant spaces highlighted in the video. The Preservation Society's Education Department reports that school groups are now asking specifically about staff histories and working conditions when they call to schedule visits. Academic citations begin to appear. A graduate student working on a thesis about public history and digital media contacts the creator for an interview about research methods and source choices. 2 undergraduate papers list the video in their bibliographies, prompting conversations among faculty about when and how YouTube content can function as a legitimate historical source. Publishers reach out about potential book adaptations. Documentary producers send emails about expanding the material into a longer series. The video becomes both finished work and proof of concept, evidence that there is a real audience for detailed, nuanced history that refuses easy narratives. The comment section continues to grow. Threads branch into arguments, some productive, some repetitive. The creator replies selectively, focusing on correcting factual misunderstandings and dropping links to primary sources for viewers who want to read further. One exchange becomes particularly notable. A commenter identifies themselves as a distant Vanderbilt descendant. They write, "This is difficult to watch, but it is fair. My family's story includes both achievement and harm. Acknowledging both is necessary." Another commenter, who says they descend from Newport domestic workers, responds, "Thank you for saying that. It matters." The exchange gathers thousands of likes and replies. Several viewers call it the most meaningful conversation they have ever seen in a YouTube comment thread. 3 weeks after release, a regional newspaper publishes a feature on the video's impact on heritage tourism in Newport. Reporters interview guides, museum staff, and visitors who came specifically because they saw the video. The general conclusion is clear. Interest in the Breakers has not declined at all, but the nature of that interest has changed. Visitors arrive asking more questions, especially about the people who worked there. Not just the people whose names are on the gate. The video settles into its long-term place inside the platform's recommendation maze. View counts keep rising, more slowly now. It appears in suggested rows for viewers interested in history, architecture, labor, inequality, and museum content. Teachers add it to playlists. It starts to function as reference material as much as entertainment. The creator continues to receive occasional messages from viewers who discover personal connections to the story. One woman tracks down her great-great-aunt's employment records at another Newport estate after being inspired to search. A man learns that his grandfather worked as a groundskeeper at the Breakers in the 1930s, a fact never mentioned in family conversations. The stories accumulate. Not in dramatic bursts that rewrite history, but in small increments that slightly shift how people think about the Gilded Age. Less as pure aspiration or pure condemnation, and more as a complicated reality that needs to be seen from several angles at once. The view counter keeps ticking upward. The comment section keeps expanding. The video now lives in the digital archive, available to anyone with an internet connection and 28 minutes to spare. Whether it will matter in the very long term is impossible to know. History is long. Online platforms are new. But for now, the story is reaching people, provoking questions, and adding more voices to a conversation that will continue as long as the house still stands. Chapter 15. Waves Against the Stone. The Breakers opens to visitors at 10 o'clock each morning, April through December. Staff arrive much earlier. Security walks the grounds at dawn. Conservators move through the rooms, checking for cracks, leaks, or damage from overnight temperature and humidity changes. Guides review schedules, rehearse key points, and get ready for school groups and bus tours. In the space of roughly 2 hours, the house shifts from silent shell to working museum. That transformation repeats every single day. It has repeated, in one form or another, for more than 70 years. Visitor numbers rise and fall with the seasons. Summer brings the largest crowds, up to 3,000 people on peak days in July and August. Autumn stays busy, especially on weekends when foliage pulls tourists into New England. Winter is quieter. In January and February, the house closes to the public entirely, so crews can tackle work too noisy, dusty, or disruptive to do around visitors. On average, about 400,000 people pass through the Breakers each year. Their tickets keep the place alive. Ticket sales bring in roughly $12 million annually. That money covers the basics: day-to-day maintenance, staff salaries, utilities, insurance, and smaller repair projects. Donations and grants go toward the big jobs: roof campaigns, stone restoration, conservation work on furniture, textiles, and paintings. The budget balances, but only just. Some years end with a small surplus. Others require dipping into reserves. The Preservation Society manages several properties in Newport, yet the Breakers is the flagship, the house that generates most of the income that helps support the rest. Take away public access, and the numbers stop working. Simply keeping the Breakers standing and presentable costs around $3 million a year. That is before any surprise crises. Major capital projects arrive on their own schedule. A single roof replacement completed in the year 2015 cost about $5 million. Future work will not be cheaper. The alternative to constant investment is controlled decline, closing off rooms, stretching out maintenance cycles, accepting that some areas will slowly deteriorate. Many historic sites end up there. Limited budgets spread thin. Caretakers trying to save what they can and document what they cannot. The Breakers is not at that stage yet. Visitor revenue is still strong. Public interest has not collapsed. For now, the house survives in the present tense. The long term is less clear. Climate change adds new pressure. Sea levels rise measurably. Storms hit harder. The cliff edge erodes inch by inch. Coastal landmarks face risks that the first preservationists in 1948 did not have to consider. In the year 2018, the Preservation Society commissioned engineering and environmental studies. The conclusions were sobering, but not apocalyptic. The mansion sits far enough back from the cliff to remain structurally safe for many decades, possibly centuries. But erosion does not stop. Storm surges push higher. Warmer, wetter air accelerates salt damage to stone and metal. Adapting means spending more money. upgraded drainage, improved climate control systems to manage humidity swings, protective treatments for exterior stone, emergency plans, and physical defenses for extreme weather. Each line item adds to the cost of keeping the house open. So the question quietly becomes, how long can a building designed as a private summer residence function as a heavy-use, almost year-round museum? No one can answer with certainty. The Breakers has already outlived several predictions. When it opened to the public in 1948, some observers gave it maybe 20 years before costs crushed the new preservation effort. In the 1970s, people worried that heritage tourism would fade and leave places like this stranded. Those forecasts were wrong. The institution adapted, fundraising diversified, programming expanded. Public curiosity turned out to be more durable than anyone expected. But past survival does not guarantee future survival. The house now exists in a constant tension between preservation and access, between period accuracy and modern expectations, between the story the Vanderbilts meant to project and the story historians and curators tell today. That tension is not a flaw. It has been built into the place since the moment it opened to paying visitors. The instant strangers walked through the front door in 1948, the Breakers stopped being a purely private symbol and became something else. Not necessarily better or worse, just fundamentally different. What the mansion represents keeps shifting. In 1948, it was often framed as proof of Gilded Age excess, a warning about fortunes that rose fast and fell faster. In the 1960s and 70s, it was highlighted as an architectural masterpiece worth saving, even if its origins were complicated. In recent decades, the Breakers has increasingly been used to talk about the full tangle of American history: concentrated wealth and hard labor, staggering beauty and visible exploitation, dreams and consequences, all contained within 70 stone and marble rooms. Future interpreters will bring their own priorities. They will ask new questions, focus on different details, and draw other lessons from the same staircase, the same hall, the same loggia. The physical structure will change only slowly. A repaired cornice here, a reinforced beam there. The marble will still be marble. The Atlantic will still stretch beyond the lawn. The service stairs will stay steep and narrow. The Great Hall will still make people lean back and look up. What really evolves is understanding. What we choose to see. What we decide to emphasize. What we feel responsible for passing on. Morning light spills into the Great Hall. Dust motes hang in the beams of sun like slow-moving snow. Outside, the first tour bus of the day pulls up to the entrance. Visitors step down, phones in hand, already angling for their first shot. They will walk through the same spaces the Vanderbilts once crossed in gowns and tails. They will sleep in different beds, work different jobs, live in a different economy. But for a short time, they will share this architecture across more than a century. Some will see only beauty, some will see primarily injustice, some will feel both at once. Some will be stunned into silence, some will be annoyed by the crowds, some will take a few photos, buy a magnet, and never think about it again. The house allows for all of these reactions. It does not argue back. It does not defend itself. It simply stands as it has stood since 1895, as evidence of what was built, what was lost, what was saved, and at what price. Below the cliff, the waves keep working at the rock. They were here long before the first stone was set. They will still be here if and when the last stone falls. For now, both forces coexist: stone and water, memory and time. The past held in place at considerable cost so the present can look at it closely, question it, learn from it, and decide what to carry forward. The doors open. The first visitors step inside. The house begins another day doing the job it has done for nearly 77 years, offering its rooms as a classroom for anyone willing to look beyond the surface.